You ever get tired of explaining your soul to people who never deserved access to your heart in the first place? You ever feel like the more you speak, the less they understand? Sometimes the greatest power is not in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. The world is noisy, but you don't have to be. The world is busy, chaotic, full of people chasing approval. But you're built for something different. You're not here to convince people of your worth. You're not here to beg them to see your growth. You're not here to shrink yourself to fit their comfort. You are here to evolve, to rise, to become exactly what God designed you to be, without the applause, without the crowd, and without the noise. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's strength. It's healing. It's the echo of someone who is finally choosing themselves. Because the moment you shift your energy inward, life begins to shift outward. Here's how everything changes when you focus on yourself and stay silent. When you finally stop reacting to disrespect, something deep inside of you begins to shift. At first, it's uncomfortable. Your instinct is to speak up, to defend, to explain, to shout back, just so they know they crossed the line. But with time and wisdom, you begin to understand that not all battles are worth fighting. You start to see that every reaction is an investment. And you've been spending your peace on people who never deserved your energy in the first place. You stop allowing their words to pull you out of character. You no longer feel the need to teach lessons to those who've already decided not to learn. Because true strength isn't shown in retaliation, it's shown in restraint. The moment you choose silence over a reaction, you're not letting them win. You're proving you've already outgrown the game. You start realizing that disrespect doesn't define you, it defines them. Their tone, their sarcasm, their passive aggression, that's a mirror reflecting their own inner chaos, not your worth. And suddenly it clicks. Reacting to it only chains you to their dysfunction. You've given too many people free access to your peace. They walked in, made a mess, and walked out without consequence. But now you're changing the rules. You're closing the doors they used to walk through so casually. You're learning that silence is not surrender, it's strategy. You're no longer explaining to people who pretend not to hear. You're no longer proving your heart to those committed to misunderstanding it. You tasted what it feels like to have peace, and nothing tastes better. When you stop reacting, they get confused. They expect the old version of you. They expect the raised voice, the defensive words, the emotional outbursts. But now, there's just silence, there's just calm. There's just you, unbothered, unmoved, untouched. And that silence, it stings them louder than anything you could have said. Because silence forces them to sit with themselves. It forces them to confront their own behavior without the distraction of your reaction. You've stopped feeding their ego with your frustration. You've stopped making them feel powerful by showing them they can control your emotions. And that's the moment you start reclaiming your life. Because peace starts with the decision to stop giving people the blueprint to your emotional triggers. You begin to feel lighter, not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop walking into situations that cost you your peace just to keep others comfortable. You no longer shrink your truth just to avoid conflict. You stop putting yourself on emotional sale just so others can afford your love. And the more you choose peace over pettiness, silence over reaction, grace over drama, the more you start to feel powerful in ways you never knew existed. This isn't about bottling things up or pretending you don't feel. It's about realizing that not every disrespect deserves a response. Some things are beneath the dignity of a reply. Some people don't deserve access to your voice. They used to push your buttons just to see you react. They fed off your emotional outbursts because it made them feel significant. But now you're detached. You're grounded. You've mastered the art of not responding, and that mastery is what makes them uncomfortable. Because when you no longer react, you take away their control. You stop playing their game. You no longer dance to the rhythm of their chaos. And what happens next? You rise. You rise in silence, with dignity, with inner power. You start reclaiming the parts of yourself that were always traded for temporary validation. That's the power of silence. It gives you back you, and the healing begins. You no longer feel exhausted by every interaction. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop carrying the weight of other people's words on your shoulders. The freedom that comes with not reacting, it's indescribable. You sleep better, you breathe easier. You start hearing your own thoughts again, not the echoes of everyone else's negativity. You find time to think, to grow, to build. You no longer live on edge, constantly preparing for battle. Instead, you walk with calm, speak with clarity, and live with confidence. Because when you stop reacting to disrespect, you start respecting yourself. And then comes the clarity. You start seeing people for who they are, not for who you hoped they'd be. Disrespect is no longer something you excuse or rationalize. It's something you recognize and walk away from. You no longer argue about how much you deserve. You no longer entertain conversations that leave you doubting yourself. You set standards and you enforce them with silence, with distance, with peace. You stop trying to change them and start changing your environment. You understand that you can't heal in the same place that made you sick, so you leave. Or maybe you stay, but you detach. And that detachment saves your soul. You begin to glow differently. It's not the kind of glow that comes from approval. It's not external. It's internal. You walk into rooms and people feel your presence because you're no longer desperate for attention. You carry a calm that comes from knowing who you are. And when someone tries to pull you back into the old version of yourself, you simply smile and walk away because you've worked too hard for your peace to give it up over a moment of disrespect. You know now every reaction costs energy. And you only have so much. So why waste it proving yourself to people who will never understand you? Don't let them stop you. Peace becomes your priority. Not proving your point, not getting the last word, not making sure they understand your heart, just peace. And that shift, when peace becomes the goal, it changes everything. You stop chasing closure and you start creating boundaries. You stop explaining your value and you start embodying it. You realize that maturity isn't always speaking up. It's knowing when to stay silent and walk away. You stop letting their lack of respect turn you into someone you're not. Instead, you let their actions speak for them, while your silence speaks for you. The more you focus on your peace, the more you see the truth. People who truly love and respect you won't constantly test your limits. They won't play games with your mind. They won't dismiss your boundaries. And those who do, you no longer try to convince them to see your worth. You just stop giving them the privilege of access. You stop explaining why you're distant. You stop breaking yourself into pieces just to keep them whole. You just let them go. And in that quiet release, you gain everything they were holding you back from. And here's the beautiful part. Your silence doesn't just protect you, it transforms you. You begin to build a new version of yourself, one that no longer seeks validation, one that no longer fears being misunderstood. You become emotionally bulletproof, not because you don't feel, but because you've learned how to feel without reacting. Your strength is not in how loud you can be, but in how calm you can remain when the storm tries to shake you. That's growth. That's power. That's peace reclaimed. When the next test comes, and it will, pause, breathe, choose silence. Remember what it costs to react. Remember what it steals from you, and then choose your peace over their noise. Because the moment you do, that's the moment your life begins to change. There comes a moment in life when you get tired of spinning in circles, tired of getting caught in storms that aren't yours, tired of being dragged into chaos that you didn't create. And it's in that moment of exhaustion, of clarity, of awakening, that you decide to pull back, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. You stop chasing closure. You stop matching their volume. You stop explaining your heart to people who only twist your words. And instead, you turn inward. You become still, you become silent. And slowly something extraordinary begins to happen. Your silence becomes your shield. Your silence becomes your power. because there's nothing more intimidating to someone who thrives on chaos than a person who refuses to react to it. You stop feeding the drama and you start starving their control. As your silence deepens, so does your strength. You learn that peace isn't something given, it's something built, something chosen, something protected. And every time you stay silent in the face of their noise, you lay another brick on the foundation of your inner fortress. They try to provoke you, they try to drag you into the same old patterns. But the version of you they're trying to reach no longer lives there. You've upgraded, you've ascended, and your silence isn't just a lack of words. It's a declaration that you will no longer participate in dysfunction disguised as communication. You will no longer be baited into battles that cost you your dignity. You will no longer pour energy into trying to fix people who only seek to break you. Their chaos starts to lose its grip on you. What used to bother you no longer shakes you. What used to make your blood boil now gets met with nothing but calm. And the reason is simple. You've shifted your focus. You're no longer focused on being right, being heard, or being understood. You're focused on being whole, on being grounded, on protecting the garden of your mind from the weeds of their chaos. And you realize that not every conflict is worth your peace. Not every invitation to drama deserves your attendance. Some things are best left unanswered. Some people are best left in the silence they created. And you are best left to grow quietly, powerfully, undisturbed. They begin to notice it too, the change, the stillness, the way you no longer flinch when they throw shade, the way you no longer rush to defend yourself against their projections, and it unsettles them. Because your silence forces them to deal with their own reflection. When you stop reacting, they can no longer use your energy to validate their behavior. They're left alone with their noise, their guilt, their chaos, and in that silence, they begin to unravel. Not because you punish them, but because your calm exposed their storm. Your detachment exposed their need for control. Your stillness revealed their restlessness. And nothing is more powerful than that. You begin to thrive in this space of silence. You hear your own voice again. You start to reconnect with your intuition. You realize how much of your life was spent in reaction mode, constantly adjusting yourself to other people's dysfunctions. But now you're still, and in that stillness, you gain vision. You see the games, you see the patterns, you see the manipulation for what it is. And instead of engaging, you observe, you protect, you preserve. You realize that peace isn't passive. It's a form of power. And it's one that very few ever master, because mastering silence requires more strength than shouting ever will. You begin to walk differently, not with arrogance, but with authority. The kind of authority that comes from knowing you no longer need to prove yourself. You're not driven by ego. You're driven by purpose, by peace, by alignment. And suddenly the things that once derailed you no longer have access. They might still try, but you're no longer available for chaos. Your silence becomes a wall they can't climb. Your absence becomes a message they can't ignore. You don't argue, you don't explain, you don't chase. You just move different, you elevate, you protect your frequency. And in doing so, you become untouchable, not because you're hiding, but because you finally built a life that doesn't require the approval of broken people. There's a calm that settles in your chest, a quiet confidence that begins to shape everything you do. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you know your intentions. You no longer worry about who walks away because you're no longer begging anyone to stay. You no longer let chaos define your day because you've taken control of your peace. And as you navigate life with this inner strength, doors begin to open, opportunities begin to align. Not because you forced them, but because your silence created the space for clarity. You're no longer reacting to what's around you. You're responding from within. And that is the birthplace of transformation. People may say you've changed, that you're distant, cold, different. And they're right. You have changed. You've outgrown survival mode. You've stepped into purpose. You've chosen peace over popularity, growth over gossip, alignment over approval. You've learned that your silence speaks volumes, and not everyone deserves a front row seat to your evolution. So you stay quiet. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise. You've seen what chaos does to a soul. You've lived through the noise, and now you've chosen to live above it. That's a different kind of strength, a rare kind, one that can't be faked. And now your silence becomes your language. It says, I don't need to fight to be seen. It says, my peace is too expensive for your dysfunction. It says, I choose to rise, not wrestle. It says, I know who I am and I don't need to explain it. And that kind of energy is powerful. It shakes rooms. It shifts dynamics. It silences chaos, not by force, but by presence. Because nothing is louder than someone who has mastered the art of quiet strength. And that's what you've become. Not reactive, not defensive, but composed, rooted, calm. You've chosen to be the eye of the storm, not the storm itself. And what once hurt you now becomes your testimony. What once triggered you now rolls off your back. You've trained your nervous system to stay calm in the face of noise. You've learned to breathe through the moments that used to break you. You've risen, not by fighting, but by letting go. You've elevated not by proving, but by protecting. And in this space, you become more powerful than ever. Because the person who can stay silent in chaos is the one who controls the room, the one who leads the energy, the one who dictates the outcome. That's real power, not found in volume, but in vibration. Keep walking in silence, not to hide, but to build. You keep choosing peace, not because you don't have a voice, but because your voice is too valuable to waste on noise. You keep showing up, not for them, but for you. And slowly, you become a force, a silent force, unshakable, unbothered, untouchable. Because once you discover the power of your silence, you'll never let their chaos touch you again. There comes a point in your journey where you realize not everyone deserves a front row seat to your transformation. You look around and notice some of the people closest to you are the least supportive. Some of the ones you kept showing up for, checking in on, believing in, don't clap when you win. They don't celebrate your growth. In fact, some of them act like your progress is a personal attack and it hits you hard. Because you thought they'd be proud. You thought they'd walk with you step by step, season by season. But what you learn is this. Some people are only meant to witness the beginning of your story, not the evolution of it. They were never equipped to handle your rise. They liked you broken, dependent, doubtful. But the moment you start shining, the moment you start healing, they get uncomfortable. And that discomfort, it's not your burden to carry anymore. You start seeing it in their energy, in their silence when you share good news, in their backhanded compliments, in the way they downplay your efforts, make jokes out of your discipline, or change the subject when your growth enters the room. At first, you make excuses for them. You convince yourself they're just busy, distracted, having a hard time. But deep down, you know. They don't want to see you rise because your growth forces them to confront their own stagnation. And suddenly, you begin to understand. Your transformation isn't for public consumption. It's sacred. It's private. It's divine. And not everyone has earned the right to witness it. Some people only show up to observe, not support. To compare, not to celebrate. And those people, you slowly move them out of the front row. It's not about bitterness. It's not about revenge. It's about alignment. About being intentional with who you allow near your progress. Because when you're rebuilding yourself, when you're rewriting your narrative, you need people who speak life into you, not plant doubt. You need people who pour into your spirit, not drain it. You need people who see your transformation as beautiful, not threatening. And if someone can't clap for you when you're not in the room, if they can't cheer when you win, then they don't belong at the table when you eat. You learn that protecting your peace includes protecting your circle, and the smaller the circle, the more powerful your growth becomes. Because now you're surrounded by people who water your soul, not trample it. You begin to move differently. You stop announcing every move. You stop oversharing with people who only listen to gather information, not to understand. You stop opening your heart to those who poke holes in it. Your circle tightens, your standards rise, and your peace multiplies. Not everyone gets updates on your progress anymore. Not everyone gets access to your healing. You stop handing out front row tickets to people who only want to watch you fall. You understand that this season of your life requires discretion, not validation. Because some people aren't happy for you, they're just curious. Some people don't support you, they study you, mimic you, even envy you. And the most dangerous enemy is the one who pretends to be your fan. As your transformation deepens, so does your discernment. You start sensing who truly roots for you and who only tolerates you. You hear it in their tone. You feel it in their absence. You see it in their behavior. And the more you elevate, the clearer it becomes. Your light will reveal who was hiding in the shadows. Your consistency will expose their envy. Your silence will uncover their intentions. And instead of fighting to keep them, you release them. Not with anger, but with peace. Because you finally realize that letting go is a form of self-respect. You no longer force seats to be filled by those who can't handle your glory. You no longer beg to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. And with every person you release, you feel lighter, freer, stronger. You're no longer building for approval, you're building for purpose. You're no longer filtering your success to make others comfortable. You're no longer shrinking yourself to fit spaces you've outgrown. You rise unapologetically. You shine fully. You step into rooms with quiet confidence, not to prove, but to be. Because now you know who you are. You've fought battles in silence. You've rebuilt yourself in the dark. And anyone who wasn't there during your storms doesn't get to judge your sunshine. They don't get to question your glow. They weren't present for the pain, so they don't get access to the payoff. You learn to love in silence, to heal in silence, to win in silence, not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring your journey. You understand the value of privacy. You realize that some of your most powerful moments will never be posted, never be praised, never be seen by the masses, but that doesn't make them any less valid. Your transformation is not a performance, it's a process. And it deserves protection. It deserves reverence. You've worked too hard, cried too long, bled too much to let spectators ruin the sanctity of your healing. So you build quietly, you grow relentlessly, and you let the results speak for themselves. And those results, they speak volumes. Without you uttering a word, people start to notice the shift. They see the glow, they feel the peace, they witness the strength. But they don't know the story behind it. They don't know the nights you almost gave up, the tears you cried in silence, the betrayal you endured, the pain you transmuted into power. And that's okay. They weren't supposed to know. They weren't supposed to see. Because not everyone is worthy of the behind the scenes. Not everyone is worthy of the climb. Some people only want to stand at the finish line, but they never showed up for the miles. And those people, you let them watch from afar. You no longer seek applause. You no longer explain your glow. You no longer lower your volume just to fit into rooms too small for your voice. You've outgrown that. You've stepped into a new dimension of self-worth, one that no longer depends on validation, one that thrives on alignment. And when someone asks why they weren't invited into this version of you, you simply smile because they wouldn't understand. They were too focused on who you used to be to appreciate who you've become. They were too busy doubting you to walk beside you. And now, you've learned that elevation requires separation. Keep growing, you keep healing, you keep becoming. And you do it with intention, with grace, with quiet fire. Because you finally realize that your transformation isn't for the crowd, it's for your calling. And not everyone has the maturity, the heart, or the spirit to hold space for that. So you let them go. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Because the ones meant to walk with you, they'll meet you at the top. Not because you brought them, but because they grew alongside you. There comes a moment when you finally understand that your energy is your most valuable currency. Not your name, not your reputation, not the opinions floating in the mouths of people who barely know your truth. It's your energy that defines the quality of your life. And when you've been through enough, when you've poured yourself out for people who didn't care, fought battles just to defend your name, and exhausted yourself trying to make others see your heart, you start to realize it's not worth it. That fight to be understood, that urge to correct every lie, every rumor, every twisted version of your character, it only robs you of peace. It drains the very force you need to keep growing, healing, and elevating. You start to learn that silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Because when you protect your energy, you stop giving life to things that were never worthy of your attention. You begin to recognize how often you tried to explain yourself to people who already made up their minds. How often you felt the need to defend your name, thinking if you just spoke a little louder, if you just gave a little more detail, they'd finally see the truth. But they never did. And it wasn't because your truth wasn't valid. It was because their ears were never open to hear it. That's when the shift begins. You choose peace over proving. You choose rest over reaction. You learn that your energy is sacred and not everyone deserves access to it. Every conversation doesn't need a comeback. Every accusation doesn't need a response. And every insult doesn't need to be acknowledged. Because your power isn't in your defense, it's in your restraint. Protecting your energy doesn't mean you avoid conflict out of fear. It means you walk away out of strength. You no longer feel the need to sit in rooms where your spirit doesn't feel safe. You no longer stay in conversations that poison your mind and shake your confidence. You stop attending emotional battles that cost you your sanity. You realize that not everyone is worth the explanation. Not every situation deserves closure. And not every lie needs correcting, because the truth doesn't need a press release. It just needs time. You learn that real peace is found in letting your growth speak louder than your defense, letting your actions scream what words never could. And that kind of peace, it changes your entire world. You start conserving your emotional energy like your life depends on it, because it does. Every time you waste that energy on defending your name, you take away from the energy you could have used to build your dreams, protect your peace, nurture your healing, and you get tired of giving away your light just to make people who live in darkness feel comfortable. You start to prioritize your well-being over your image. You start focusing more on being right within yourself than being seen as right by others, and the weight lifts, the anxiety lessens. You breathe deeper because you're no longer holding your breath, waiting for people to see your worth. You see it now. And that's enough. And when you stop defending your name, the noise gets louder for a while. The whispers turn to rumors. The silence turns into assumptions. And it's uncomfortable. But you learn to sit in that silence. You learn to let people think what they want while you build what you need. You learn to be still while the storm rages, knowing that storms don't last, but your character does. Because when you're rooted in truth, you don't chase lies. When you're grounded in peace, you don't respond to chaos. You watch, you learn, and you grow. Quietly, powerfully, undisturbed. The power of protecting your energy is that it recenters you. You return to your core. You start asking, does this serve my spirit? Does this align with my purpose? Does this drain me or feed me? And anything that doesn't pour into you, you release. You stop negotiating with energy vampires. You stop entertaining half-hearted conversations. You stop entertaining half-hearted conversations. You stop defending your soul to people who profit from misunderstanding you. And your life begins to transform, not because the world changed, but because your focus did. You stopped trying to be seen, and you started choosing to be whole. You stopped trying to be validated, and you started walking in your own authority. It's not always easy. There will be days when you're tempted to speak up, clap back, set the record straight. But you pause, you breathe, and you ask yourself, is this fight worth the cost? Most times, it's not. Most times, silence is the loudest answer. Detachment is the boldest move. Walking away is the strongest act of love for yourself. Because anyone who truly knows your heart doesn't need an explanation. And anyone who needs an explanation to respect you doesn't deserve your presence. So you keep your head high, your peace intact, and your energy protected. And you let the rest unfold as it's meant to. And as you practice this more, you become untouchable. Not because you're perfect, but because you're no longer emotionally available to chaos. People will try to test your patience, bait your emotions, manipulate your narrative, but you remain still, you respond with peace or not at all. You hold your power in your silence. And over time, they begin to realize they can't control someone who doesn't need to be defended. They can't provoke someone who's already decided they're not reactive. They can't break someone who's already chosen healing over validation. That's what it means to be powerful, to be calm in the face of chaos, to be quiet in the midst of noise, to be centered in a world that demands distraction. Your energy is your compass. It guides who you let in, what you allow, how you move. And when you protect it fiercely, life begins to align. You attract better, you choose wiser, you walk lighter, you speak with more intention and less desperation. You no longer need to convince people of your value because your presence makes it known. You don't need to yell your truth because it lives in your actions. You don't need to chase respect because you carry it in how you carry yourself. And every step you take in that energy builds a life that reflects your inner peace. Let them talk. Let them twist. Let them misunderstand. You no longer owe them a performance. You owe yourself your peace. You've learned that every time you protect your energy, you declare to the universe, I know who I am. And that declaration is louder than any defense you could ever give. There comes a time in your life when you get tired of trying to make people understand a journey they were never a part of. You stop wasting words on people who only listen to respond, not to feel. You stop opening your heart to ears that were never tuned to your frequency. Because it hits you, no matter how carefully you explain your pain, no matter how honestly you describe your growth, some people will never get it. And not because you're too complex, but because they weren't there. They didn't see you breaking at midnight. They didn't hear the silence after betrayal. They didn't watch you rebuild yourself with nothing but prayer, faith, and a wounded soul. So you stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop needing them to see it, because your journey was never meant to be a presentation. It was meant to be a transformation. You begin to protect your story the way a warrior protects their scars, not out of shame, but out of sacredness. Because these scars tell stories that only you can understand. They represent chapters of your life no one read. They mark battles no one else fought. And every time you tried to explain your journey, it felt like you were minimizing it just to make others comfortable. You watered it down so they could sip from it without choking. But your truth isn't a bedtime story. It's a battlefield memoir. And not everyone deserves to hear it. You've learned that trying to make people understand is exhausting, especially when they've already judged your life from a distance. So instead of explaining, you simply evolve. You stop trying to convince people of how far you've come. You stop needing validation from those who doubted your path. And in doing so, you reclaim your power. Because when you constantly explain yourself, you're giving others the authority to approve your process. And they don't deserve that authority. They weren't there when you were on your knees praying for strength. They didn't witness the days you cried in silence because no one understood. They didn't hold your hand when life shattered everything you knew. So why do they get to weigh in on who you've become? Why do they get to question the moves you made to survive? You finally realize they don't. And that realization frees you. You begin to live more quietly. You stop updating people on every step. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting. Your journey is not entertainment. Your healing is not a performance. You no longer need people to approve of your timeline, your choices, or your pace. You stop looking for applause and start looking inward. And what you find is peace. Peace in knowing that your journey is valid, even if no one understands it. Peace in knowing that the lessons you've learned came with a cost, and only you can appreciate their worth. You stop explaining your detours, your delays, your decisions, because you know every twist had a purpose. People will always have something to say. They'll criticize your path while standing still on theirs. They'll question your healing because it makes them uncomfortable. They'll minimize your transformation because it reminds them of their stagnation. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize that their opinions aren't rooted in truth, they're rooted in projection. and you refuse to carry that weight anymore. You stop breaking yourself down just to make your journey digestible. You stop translating your soul for people who never cared to learn your language. You just keep walking, knowing that your steps are ordered, even if they're misunderstood. And something amazing happens when you stop explaining, you start expanding. Without the burden of being understood, you grow in directions you never imagined. You no longer wait for others to catch up. You no longer slow down just to bring them along. You run your race, full speed, eyes on the finish line, heart focused on purpose. The freedom that comes from not explaining is unmatched. You feel lighter, stronger, more grounded, because every time you tried to explain your pain, it cost you a piece of your peace. Every time you tried to justify your progress, it slowed your momentum. Now, you protect both. You understand now that some people can't walk with you because they never carried what you carried. They didn't face the demons you faced. They didn't break and rebuild. So you stop expecting them to understand why you are the way you are, why you protect your space, why you cut off certain energies, why you say no without guilt, why your boundaries are sharp and your tolerance low. They weren't there when you needed a lifeline. They weren't there when you had to be your own hero. And that distance, it matters. That absence, it tells you everything. So you stop letting them narrate your story from a place they never stood. You begin to own your silence, to find comfort in being misunderstood, to rest in the fact that not everyone needs to get it. Some people aren't capable of seeing your light because they're still blind to their own darkness. And you stop dimming just to be seen. You stop unpacking your trauma for spectators. You stop revisiting wounds just to prove you've healed. You understand that real healing is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't perform. It just lives. And that's what you do. You live fully, unapologetically, without explanation. People may call you distant, cold, changed, and they're right. You've changed because life changed you, because growth demanded it, because peace required it. And you don't owe them an explanation for that. You owe yourself loyalty. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself grace. And the minute you stop explaining your journey, you start walking in that grace. You start choosing you over their opinions. You start building a life that feels good from the inside, even if it looks unfamiliar from the outside. And that's the kind of life worth protecting. Let them assume, let them wonder, let them talk. You've made peace with not being understood. You've found strength in walking alone. You've discovered power in the silence of your own becoming. And the ones meant for you, they'll never need an explanation. They'll see your heart without you having to draw a map. They'll feel your journey in the way you love, the way you live, the way you carry yourself. They'll meet you where you are, not where they imagined you'd be. And those are the ones worth keeping. There's a sacred kind of power that shows up when you stop trying to be seen and start being still. It's the kind of power that doesn't need validation, doesn't seek applause, and doesn't chase attention. You begin to realize that your glow has never been about how loudly you speak. It's about how deeply you've healed. And that healing doesn't scream, it whispers, it radiates, it walks into rooms before you do, and lingers long after you've left. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because your peace speaks louder than your presence ever could. You glow in a way that makes people pause, not because you said something, but because you said nothing, and still they felt you. This magnetism isn't about beauty, charm, or even charisma. It's about energy. It's about alignment. It's about walking into a space without needing to take it over and still commanding it by your stillness. Because when you've done the inner work, when you've fought the battles no one knows about, cried tears in silence, stood back up when no one offered a hand, you wear that resilience. You carry it in your posture. You show it in your eyes. And people can feel it. They don't know what it is about you, but they know it's different. It's powerful. It's rare. And the most amazing thing, you're not trying to be magnetic, you just are. Because you've learned how to be whole without noise. You don't move the way you used to. You don't rush to fill silence with words. You don't chase conversations or try to be the loudest in the room. You've learned to sit in stillness and let the room come to you. You've learned that your glow is brightest when you're centered, grounded, unbothered. People start leaning in, not because you're performing, but because your presence feels like peace. You don't even realize it at first. You think you're just keeping to yourself, protecting your energy, minding your business. But people notice. They notice you're calm. They notice how you don't flinch in chaos. They notice how you move with intention, how you don't chase, how you simply are. That's the glow. That's the magnetism. It's the result of becoming someone who doesn't need external validation to feel valuable. You've redefined success. You've redefined strength. You've realized that the loudest power is silent. And in that silence, you become centered in your own worth. You're no longer searching for love, for approval, for recognition. You found all of it within. And people feel that. They gravitate toward it. Because the truth is, most people are lost in noise. Most people are drained from pretending, from chasing, from performing. So when they encounter someone who doesn't play that game, someone who is simply at peace with themselves, it's magnetic. Your glow becomes a mirror, reflecting back to them everything they've been missing. You become the calm in their storm. Not because you try to fix them, but because you fixed yourself. And that fixing, it gave you a light that doesn't flicker with outside opinions. You shine consistently, gently, authentically. And that's what draws people in. They may not understand your silence, but they're drawn to it. They may not grasp your depth, but they respect it. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace. You've earned it. You've bled for it. You've sacrificed to protect it. So now, when people come close, they either rise to your energy or they fall away. That's the quiet filter stillness creates. It reveals who's meant to be in your life without you having to say a word. And the beautiful part is, you're no longer moved by who stays or goes. You've detached from needing anyone to complete you. You've filled your own cup. You become whole in your own space, and wholeness is magnetic. You start to notice how people shift around you. They become softer, more honest,